Okay, well, let's make sure we get to the user questions. So go ahead, sir.
Hi, good afternoon. I just wanted to ask, in this environment of experimentation and perpetual beta, how do you manage your teams when I can imagine that there are going to be situations where they would have a run of failures, where things that they try don't work, and although obviously if the prevailing culture is very strong and you accept that that's going to happen, that the audience has got a lot of control to some extent, clearly you can see from an individual's point of view, their confidence could drain away quite quickly. So how do you get over that and get
question of morale, sort of?
Yeah, morale and confidence and keeping going when things might be going against them.
Do you mean people who are building the product, or people who are using it?
Within your team, I mean, because it sounds great from the outside, it sounds very dynamic. But if you're working on that and the stuff you're putting up there keeps being rejected, either you're going to come under pressure as an individual, or you yourself are going to lose confidence, aren't you?
Sure. So I have some experience with this within the disruptive innovation group at eBay. It's part of our charter to explore ideas or technologies, whatever, that we think has the potential to be disruptive, but we expect a very high failure rate. Much like in the startup world, VCs invest in multiple opportunities, so one or two of those can be hopefully big successes. I think it just the makeup of the team is such that these are people who like using new stuff, who like trying new things, and who want to go very quickly from idea to idea. One of the things that we worked on very early on last year is building a Facebook application. We were wanting to do something with social commerce already, and then when the Facebook platform opened, it gave us the perfect sort of playground to try something out. We put out an application, an eBay Facebook application, and we did multiple iterations, and we basically found out that while the people who liked it used it, it wasn't really catching on. And but through the iterative process, we had a good this idea that it was nothing about the idea or our implementation that was bad. It wasn't the technology that was bad. It just was not the way the platform is set up, the type of user population. It was not. Nobody was going to get commerce on Facebook as it is today. But we knew from going in that part of our success criteria was our learnings, not necessarily product success. And we had a great sort of summary presentation that was given to company, to executives, that have good reason to think that our conclusion is solid based on the experience.
So it sounds like a feature failure, but a success in gaining information about direction.
Right. I mean, we were not measured on the success of our product. We were measured on the innovativeness or the newness and sort of the quality of the question rather than the quality of
so you had a win out of it, and it was the way you framed the challenge
that
they had.
Absolutely, yeah.
Management of expectations sounds like the answer.
Yeah.
You need to make sure that this is, you're going into this process, I guess.
Another way to look at it is what's the alternative, So you work on the same bad idea for 2 years instead of 6 months, and then it fails. So I think that's just kind of life, You think of the satellite company, Iridium, they launch satellites and they invested billions of dollars, and then no one used their cell phones, and that wouldn't have been fun either. So I think that just dealing with reality sooner at least lets you do some course corrections, and it minimizes your investment time.
And they minimize the morale hits too, it sounds like.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add to that is I think the failure comes when you don't listen. When you put a product out there and you say, here it is, hope you love it, and I think that sometimes is a mistake that's made. But if you're going out there with the understanding that everything's a crapshoot, who knows what's going to catch on viral? Let's just make sure that we're listening to how people are responding to this and making sure that we're responding in kind, and that will increase our likelihood of success, if not this time, next time.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
I think you answered some of my question in the latter part of your discussion, but how do you, from a public marketing perspective, deal with the failure? So you've talked about how you deal with it inward in the company, but say you've got to suddenly pull a feature because, it just happened with Google recently, how do you recover from that, from a public perspective, from a marketing perspective, so that you can kind of save grace and pull these features out or adjust them so that they work. And,
Question spin, sort of?
yeah.
I think transparency is a good starting point, and I mean, pulling features is brutal, especially for an existing product. I don't know, that's been a lesson I've learned over and over again with stuff I'm working on. But if you're going to do it, you just do it and you let people know, and move on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Could you talk a little bit more about internal best practices and some lessons learned on how this communication, this feedback might come back through and get communicated to stakeholders, decision makers, development? We're probably technically and process-wise a lot closer to faster release, iterative development than we are in having those communication channels set up. And I think it'd be useful to hear from people who've always been set up that way or have gone through the transition.
I'd say one thing is remove all the layers in between the people who make and implement the decisions and the people who are telling them what they should be doing. So I'm our customer support team right now. I get emails directly from users telling me what's going on.
Are you the only one getting that information?
No, I'm share it with my development team, with others when it's relevant. Instead of saying, okay, we have a group that's the customer-facing group, and it's their job to distill or summarize or escalate. People get in on the conversation in its raw form when needed, instead of sort of getting something in between that sort of protects them from the unwashed masses.
We're having a user conference, and folks are coming from all over the world, and we're encouraging our developers to go and to talk to the users directly. And in subtle ways, that kind of avoids future problems. They get feedback on what really worked, and managers too, to deal with reality and just hear what folks are saying.
So I'm not sure this is totally applicable, but as an evangelist, we've been dealing with it internally at Adobe, how to get the feedback that I come and get at conferences like this back to the development teams. So one of the things that I sort of found in my time at Adobe, which is a little bit less than a year, is the developers love to hear about what people are saying about their stuff. Like, they really get jazzed because they don't look, they don't have time to check, they don't know where to look. So if you can give them feedback in pretty easy to digest bits, they're pretty excited about that. The other thing I think is valuable is to fit in with what they're doing. So if we want a feature or we have a bug that someone reports to us, if we can submit that to their bug system and kind of get into their process, then it's much easier for them to digest that and to start making use of it and actually act on it a little bit. So if you can get your people that are out watching more integrated into the internal development processes, I think that's really beneficial for both sides.
But does that work even if it's like bad news? Like users are saying something's terrible and it sucks, it's awful?
Not always bad news. Do it. I think people are generally open. Most developers want to build something that's really cool, and every once in a while a feature that someone really loved kind of sucks, and they'll cry about it for a little bit, but at the end of the day, they realize that it's one big machine, so you got to make a better product, and you got to take the lumps with the sugar.
Conversely, we want to know, speaking as a developer, there's things that we don't like about what we're building. We just have to build it, and so we like to hear confirmation that, see, we told you. So it sounds like the communication channels need to be laid down first. It's important. Thank you for your question.
We started off by talking about user adoption and failure. I was wondering, is there a point when you know to go ahead and pull the feature, or you've created something, or in my nonprofit world, something got sponsored, so we built it, and nobody comes, so we take the stance that it needs more marketing dollars, or it hasn't gotten X, as opposed to they just don't care. Let's get rid of the thing. So, as it pertains to failing fast, at what point do you call it quits?
Is there a tipping point of numbers? Is it big numbers?
Well, I mean, numbers are a big factor, but I think as much as possible in the example that you gave, that we all have the same response. We need more marketing, or we're not getting exposure in the right place, and I think a lot of it is the more you can make the people who are using it a part of the process, so that at least you're responding to that. And if they don't care, then you're done. If they're done with it, you're done with it. But I think in a case where if we invest a lot in an application, I can tell you I'm going to be getting questions from the people above me saying, okay, what kind of return are we getting on this investment?
Right.
And at some point, you just may need to say, after you've tried to push all the buttons, at some point you need to say, okay, it didn't work, shoot me. And I think that but you have to make sure that people above you understand that there is a process. It can always get better. It could always catch later. There have been any number of times when we've been really surprised by something that's taken up virally.
Yeah.
So,
It just seems that there's always a point where something has to die. The web can't just grow in features. Every app would be, covered in links before you can get to the UI. And so I have the trouble making the case to my SMT or whatever that things just, people, users can outgrow things that you have, or maybe there just wasn't enough research or whatever.
But I think with the web, we have a wealth of technology that helps us get the information that we need to make those decisions, versus probably something like television, where probably the wrong decisions are often made about what shows get to keep going and what doesn't. I'm sure on Discovery it's 100% real. I think Fox does a pretty bad job of it.
Yeah.
Because it's very primitive ways to measure, what users like something like Arrested Development or something. That's a good show, and by any sort of measure, like you could say, well, the DVD sales are really great. Why didn't we keep the show going? Now networks are putting stuff back on the air because they say, oh, people actually like Family Guy. So, the web has
Much easier on the web.
much easier to get that sort of data to make that decision.
Thank you.
Hi. We run a modular-based platform for a specific industry, and sometimes it's hard for us to find the right balance between sticky updates to specific modules within the platform versus engaging in new applications, such as, for example, the Facebook application or some other modules. And our cash flow is not like eBay or Google, so we can't really do them all. We need to pick our spots. How do you manage this? How much sometimes you guys lose in new applications that perhaps never monetize the way you want them to? And I guess I'm trying to find the right balance for something like this.
Is that just the art?
Well, I don't know the specifics of your application or industry, but where are your users?
It's a real estate platform, and there's sticky modules that I can make to make things better versus new applications that will sell and generate more revenue. And trying to find the right balance. How do you do it for things like new Google applications, your development teams, perhaps?
I don't think there's a silver bullet, but I do think usage is really critical to that equation. So, lots of users over time you can monetize easier than if you go after the monetization hard and don't have fundamentally users using your products.
Yeah, and the thing I'd say too is it depends somewhat on what your product is. In your case, it could be something that's more functional, more utilitarian. And in a case like that, if people are using it as a tool, I wouldn't mess around a lot with that tool. I'd make sure that it worked better, but I wouldn't dump it, Whereas with entertainment, people are looking for the next new thrill. So you kind of have to jump out and offer some new things from time to time. But there is no magic formula, trust me.
Yeah, one thing that's good is that it is much cheaper these days to do experiments with putting stuff in different places.
So it sounds like you need the analytics as well to make sure that you gain that experience when you try something.
Yeah.
So measurement is probably a really important.
Any company, from a startup to a medium company to a big company, can do experiments if you have the will and sort of the desire to sort of take that risk. So you could very easily say, okay, we're gonna test stuff. We're gonna try very small places to see where is there a spark of user interest that indicates we should keep going.
Hundreds of startups are trying to innovate, and at the same time, you guys have these innovative groups. at what point does it become a little like, I guess, scary for the startups that are trying to make something, and do you invite them in if you see a technology, interesting, or do you say, hey, this is interesting, let's do this, and just kind of, with your major backing, kind of have a much better channel to distribution?
I mean, Adobe tries to invite those people in as much as we can. In fact, I mean, we were kind of in a unique position because Flash is really great at manipulating images. So you had these really great photo editors like Picnic that were built on top of the Flash player. But we're Adobe, so obviously we were going to move in that same direction. So at some point we were going to compete with our competitor, with the startups that were building on our platform. So we tried to encourage both. And I think we wanted to make sure we gave the startups equal access to our platform stuff that we would give to the internal teams that were working on Photoshop Express, which is our online version. So I think at a big company, one of the things we try to do is, yes, bring them in and give them the same kind of access we would give to our internal teams and kind of make it as fair a playing field as possible so that the best idea wins at the end of the day.
I mean, I would say don't get discouraged. I mean, no matter how much big companies try to stay innovative and do stuff that's new and interesting, they're still big companies. Nothing has changed there. And what I would say, probably most big companies would look for, or most companies in terms of are they looking to acquire a startup or work with a partner, is do they have a unique expertise that we don't? So really being experts in some area, whether it's technology or some type of user segment or some type of business idea, it's hard for, I think, a big company to be an expert in more than one area, really. Like if you're trying to say to Google, we have a great search engine, you should buy us. That probably not an easy sell, but if you have a great way to work with digital models of stuff, that may not be the sort of expertise that Google has, and if it's an area they're interested in, why not work with the people who are the experts in that area?
With a case like Discovery, we don't have a team of innovative tech people. Our tech people are basically there to make sure things keep running, so that if we get any innovation, it's coming from outside.
Well, I just encourage startups to behave completely, as independent businesses. Go build a business, and it's a big world out there. There's gaping holes in technology, and the pace of change is really fast, and that's what I think you ought to focus in on.
I'm really interested on how you determine the scale of a launch for a beta. Meaning, I know that you launch some things a little more closed-end. Is that based upon the framework or the resources on the back end being necessary to scale it out? Is it determined by the size of the development team? How do you determine an invitation-only beta versus a wider launch? What's that process that it goes through? And also, if you could just touch maybe briefly on your internal of now it's ready for beta. At what point do you guys say, okay, we birthed this thing, now we're ready to actually release it to the world? So kind of that two-step process, or more, if it's more processes than that you go through.
I would say one dimension is what question are you asking, or what are you trying to learn from the beta? That I think would drive what group of users you're trying to get to. Because you have to figure out, well, how many people do I need using the application to answer that question? It could be, only a handful, and that I think also answers the second part of your question of how do I determine what's the right stage to go out, beyond the confines of, my group or my company or my private set of users to my public. And it's like with our stuff, when we stop being able to sort of answer the questions of, like if you're doing something early, your first question is, well, can I make it run? Once I can do that, it's like, well, can I make somebody else use it? It's like, oh, okay, so and it's like, can somebody else, run it without sort of wiping their entire computer? And once you get past that, it's like, okay, well, I can send it out to people. And, I would expect it sort of works the same way, pretty much universally. And then you might sort of once you're beyond the confines of your own company, you'll see that you get much more variety of users. You can start to see that, okay, people don't use it how I expected, because they're not all sort of people who think the same way.
Scientific method?
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, that's applying the scientific method is the presumed approach to this. You know, if there's a methodology, it's that. You know, proposing some hypothesis and then trying to see if you can disprove it.
Thank you.
So each of you guys is got a small innovation group inside of a much larger organization. And the question I have is, how do you guys keep from this ivory tower effect for the, how do you interact with the larger organizations? So there's this resentment from, all the cool stuff is being done over here. We have the day-to-day drudgery work. I think, Scott Green from Google, I think you guys have a pretty well understood story to tell. I'm interested in your story and what the other guys have to say.
So you wanted to hear from Scott?
From anybody, yeah. I think I think Google's story is most public, but I know.
Well, I want to know how it was, especially as somebody, a startup. You guys were a startup. How was it to come into Google? How did your culture change, and what was sort of your experience as an outsider to begin with of how that culture worked?
Well, our culture, our product culture was very, very similar to Google's. We had small engineering teams, and the engineers decided the features. We moved fast, and we didn't have top-down decision making. So that all fit in pretty well with Google. We don't have an ivory tower kind of. That's the short answer there. The product teams are responsible for their success. They commission the projects, go build them, launch them, and users use them or don't use them.
I've been with the website since it launched in 1995, and it has been one hell of a roller coaster. What happens in a company where the main business and all the money is a different medium entirely, you go through a period where no one pays attention to you, no one cares, and it's this great R&D thing. It's like Fantasyland, and then there's a notion, well, this is going to be the new thing that's going to make a lot of money, and that didn't happen. And then it became a matter of the marketing teams for the networks recognized the web and saw, okay, this is our new tool. We want to turn this website into strictly a promotional vehicle. Well, as we all know, there's no money, there's no way to generate revenue if you're a marketing site. So now it's kind of swung back the other way to almost where it was before. But there's that, as again we all know, there's that danger of people having a little bit of knowledge. And now there are a lot of people on the TV side who have a little bit of knowledge about the web, and so they'll say, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing that? And we should be doing all these things. And I think you just kind of have to be able to make your case that you understand the brand, in my case, and that you know how to present that brand in this different medium. That's the key to it, because if they think you're some crazy person working on the web who doesn't understand the brand, they will just impose their will on you. But it's important that from their perspective that you understand what they're about, and you understand how to extend that brand in a meaningful way, so you're not going to degrade the brand in any way.
And I know you asked about how do you keep a company from creating an ivory tower. So I wanted to address that. If our group within my company is the only group that does innovative stuff, or people have to look to us to do new and interesting things, we consider that a failure. So it's part of our charter, and we sort of were created because there was a recognition that we were a little bit behind the curve as a company on using innovation as a tool to do new and interesting things to grow the business. And it's as much a part of our job to go as developers and play around with technologies and build products as it is to encourage innovation throughout the company. I mean, and there's some very practical things that we do, such as holding sort of coding contests or highlighting successes from across the company, not just our stuff that we've built, but things that we recognize as being interesting and innovative. And a lot of that work is it's grunt work. It's building flyers and figuring out logistics of how to do stuff. And I know that Yahoo's the same way. We took a lot of our inspiration from them, and they're doing a lot of grunt work to do a sort of stuff that takes the idea outside of just a core group into the larger company.
Keep on going with the questions. If you want to get any information from any of these panelists afterwards, go ahead and contact me. I'll filter it, and you can watch that space for any more information about this panel. Go ahead with your question.
Yeah, I just had a quick question about whether your beta process and the product launch process is any different when you're dealing with an application that's dealing with taking people's money, as like with eBay. Is it more of a cautious process, or do you find that users are just as willing to?
No, it's absolutely, it factors into how our approach, with eBay, with PayPal, and our CEO often, our ex-CEO at Meg Whitman would often tell us explicitly, like, she would justify certain decisions by saying, we're dealing with people's money, so we can't just throw something out there that we don't know if it works or not. We're at a point now where we feel we've done a very good job, and we're sort of the core platform is solid enough, the stuff that actually deals with the transactions and money and so on, where we can experiment with especially different user interfaces. So presenting data, showing things in different unique ways. But to answer your question is yes, it absolutely is a factor in deciding how we're approaching products that we're building out.
So, thank you. And thank you everyone for attending the panel. Any more questions? Come on around up. Thanks a lot. See you panelists.